Welcome to this week's episode of Elijah Streams Semiotic and tries to show people how to do data visualization with this data visualization library that I have been working on and have been releasing thousands of releases to this week. Actually, a lot of fun little new features, a lot of little bug fixes. But that's not really what I wanted to get into this week. I've been asked several times to actually try to walk through a minimal dashboard example. That is a lot of what I do at Netflix, so I can see why people would be interested in that. And so I'm going to try to do that. I'm not sure how much of a dashboard I can get through in an hour, but I'm going to at least get going. To that end, I put together this repo that I left a link to in the description, but I will also drop into the chat. Excellent. This is just made with a React Create app. If you go and clone it and npm I and npm start, you'll see something that looks like this. I'm calling it the Pokemon dashboard because it's based on a Pokemon data set. So unlike in previous weeks where I might have been using CodePen, I'm going to be using a traditional editor and traditional app because it's going to be using state and it's going to be dealing with sort of an interactive application and not just a single sort of one-off example. So if you want to follow along, you can clone this repo. Otherwise, you can clone it later and take a look at it. If anything interesting comes out of this, then I'll make sure to make a CodePen example of that because those are so portable. So if you've pulled this down and you're familiar with React, you should notice this is a pretty simple application. All I've added is Flexbox grid. I've added some settings, which is just some colors. I've added this Pokemon data set, which is 150 of the original Pokemon. I actually don't know anything about Pokemon, but it's an interesting data set to work with. And that's been just dropped into the initial app. I'll try to make some components. I might not. I might just make it all within this app right now. Why would I do that? Why wouldn't I do that? Well, actually, I don't want to do that because I actually want to show folks how to optimize the performance of their charts because that's actually a big outstanding question that I haven't really delved into. So I'll probably end up making components, hopefully some pure render components. We'll deal with settings and how settings should be passed down and things like that. And let's get started. So I've already installed Semiotic. And so I'll go grab an X frame, an XY frame from it. I have this data set. I sat down with my coworker, Susie, who knows Pokemon, and I asked her, well, what would she want to see in a dashboard? And we talked about a few ideas. She was primarily interested not in all of these attack numbers and speed numbers and things like that, which I thought were important, and that's what I thought was what made Pokemons, but instead she was interested in the percentage male and the height and weight and kind of some of these values like that. So I'm going to try to map some of these untraditional values, see how they map on a scatter plot to begin with. We're going to make that brushable, and then we'll show some sort of complementary charts alongside that highlight the Pokemon that you've selected, that you've brushed out of that. So that's the initial design, and we'll dive into more if we can get more out of it. That actually should be pretty straightforward. So let's create a new file. Called brushable scatter plot. That sounds fine. And the brushable scatter plot's not going to have any internal state, shouldn't have any internal state. So we should be able to just say, we should be able to just import React, import what we're going to work with, and export one of these pure render components, right? Export default props and div /div put the scatter plot here. Now that's not to say that this isn't going to be an interesting component. It's just it shouldn't have any of the lifecycle stuff besides render. And if it does have lifecycle stuff, we'll turn it into a fully featured component and we'll play around with that. So import brushable scatter plot from brushable scatter plot. And then we'll just drop that somewhere within our grid. I want it on the left-hand side. You'll notice this grid, it's going to be split into, I'll have the brushable scatter plot on the left, and then I'll have some complementary viz on the right. So what's going into this brushable scatter plot, right? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. And for now, all I'm going to send down to it is data, and it's going to be this Pokemon data, right? This Poke data here, because that's what we're going to use that's what we're going to plot on this scatter plot. So if I get into brushable scatter plot, then I can import that XY frame over here. And I can do what I was told. Plotting points. That's going to be coming in props.data. We have an X successor. Now if you'll notice, this data isn't very clean. So it's saying stuff like, even though these are numbers, they're strings. So there's coercion, there's implicit coercion all throughout JavaScript, but it's best to not rely on that. So we will say height m and the y accessor is going to be weight kilograms. And we should be able to that should just work. Let's see if it does. There it is. Sure enough, we have this, this not so helpful scatter plot over here. Now, if we wanted to, we could turn this into a responsive XY frame. That should work just fine in this. And say responsive width equals true. See what that does. And sure enough, we have a responsive width scatter plot over on the left there. It's hard to tell what's going on with it because we don't have any axes, so we'll put some axes in. There we go. I don't know what these mean, though I could guess that the one on the left is kilograms and the one on the bottom is meters, just because of the scale that they're being shown at. But I can add that to it, right? Kilograms, weight in kilos, and then label height in meters. And so far, this is all pretty standard stuff. I'm going to get away from the responsive frame just because I don't want to deal with that right now. We might come back and optimize this for responsiveness. But it's that easy to turn on and off, so that's not a tremendous challenge. What I want to do is I want to get some stuff on screen so then I can start to really dive into any issues we might run into. So margin left, 50, margin, actually we want a little bit more because I'm going to show that label, and margin bottom, 50, right 10, top 10. Let's see what that looks like. Can give it a size because I'm going to be working with the same screen real estate the whole time. So 800 by 800 should be fine. Maybe a little too much. How about 750 by 750? Now it's not going into my other. All right. So very quickly we plotted the height by weight. We don't know what anything is because we hover over it, we can't see anything. We also have no, we're not using any colors here, so maybe some colors might prove useful. The main app is importing this set of type colors, which allows you to color them based on their primary type. We can send that down. Brushable scatter plot. We sit here and we say point style equals fill of d.type1, and what we've sent down is in props.color, but I'm not going to keep doing this props thing because that's kind of ugly. So what I'll do, this is what I'll return, and I will destructure those props. Get color and data equals props. And that's a lot cleaner. Color of type 1. See if that works. And sure enough, we've got a bunch of color over here, right? Something I still don't quite understand. I've seen people apply radiuses with styles, and sometimes it seems like it doesn't work for me. Apparently it worked that time, so that's good. So you could get some sense without having any kind of legend in place. You could get some sense of what these colors are if we turned on annotation, stuff like that. But really, we should put a legend in place. People talk to me about legends all the time, and I think one of the challenges with legends is that there's so many different ways to do legends that I find reusable legends and sort of automatic legends to be very, very challenging. So I'm going to just drop a legend in here. I'm going to give it another row on the right. I'm going to put a legend over here, right? So it should show up all over here above whatever these other vizzes are. And what's that legend going to look like? Well, it's going to be another. One of these simple components. So I'll just save this one as a legend. We can come back and make this legend interactive. We could do all sorts of things. We'll see what happens. I'm going to send it color. Color we know to be a hash, right? If I look over here, it's a hash of some kind of type and some kind of color. And so if I just do an object.keys of color, then I know that's what my types are, right? And so I can return, what do I want to return? How do I want to build this? I think in this case I will build legend items. one for each type, right? So we're going to say types.map. And we know D now is going to be a string. So what we're going to return is we're going to return we'll say a span. That span will have that string. That span will also have a span within it. And that span within it will have a few things. We'll say display inline block. Width of 20 pixels. Height of 20 pixels. And a background equal to color of that type that I should be displaying. So let's see what it shows. Let's see if that shows any kind of decent legend. Oh, I guess I have to import it and actually instantiate it, don't I? I feel like I've gotten off screen in a couple of places. Who knows? Who knows what's happening? Pokey data. Okay. So let's import that legend. And then let's drop that legend here. And what am I sending it? I'm sending it color, right? I'm sending it color. Color equals type colors. Let's see what it looks like now, if it works. Legend items, probably should put that in what I'm returning. And also probably should give these a key, right? That would be nice. Key equals D, or we'll make it more descriptive. Legend item. So there we go. We've got the very ugly legend for now. You can start to adjust that. Clean it up a little bit. Clean it up a lot. It's really quite ugly. I'm going to do a lot of inline styles just because it's quick and I want this to move quickly. You should use CSS out in the real world. That's what I'm trying to say. You should use CSS out in the real world. And let's see, what else do we want to do? Style. Display, inline, block, and then we'll say width equals 30%. See if that just makes this slightly readable. There we go. Okay, so now I've got a simple legend, right? I know that this color equals fire, you know, I'm gonna start to fiddle with things because that's just what you do. Fiddle and fiddle and fiddle. Text, transform, capitalize. This makes me, well, that's not what it's supposed to do. Text, transform, capitalize. Text, transform, capitalize. Why does that work? Text, transform. That's what you guys tuned in for, right? CSS tricks. Me reading CSS tricks. God damn. How come the internet is so slow now? Text transform, uppercase, lowercase, capitalize. Wonder what's going on there. Why wouldn't it capitalize? Who knows? Maybe somebody following at home can tell me what wonky CSS thing I did. All right, so anyway, I've got a legend. I've got a legend, it associates with these colors. I'm going to put a little bit of a black border on those circles because I like a little bit of a black border. Stroke black. And that feels pretty good. And I want to say hover annotation equals true. And now when I hover over them, I can see what they are. Oh, but it's terrible, right? I mean, this is one thing that I think probably looks like magic out in the world. And it's one in which for myself, this is what I do. So that's what I suggest you do, which is once you start to make your tooltips, you need some CSS for the tooltips. If there's a way for me to package up that CSS that sort of conveniently sends it out into the world, just let me know. Otherwise, I just include it in all these examples. And so this tooltip content thing, in fact, I'm going to get these axis paths too, because I like that too. In fact, there's like a whole set of nice things over here. Look at all these nice things. These are just very nice. This is like my default CSS. And that's what I do. I go to one of my code pens or I go to some other example where I've got all this CSS, and that's what I use. So let's look through it real quickly. That's not applicable. So tooltip content, it's using this transform attribute to move it 50% over and 100% above the point that you're hovering, because that's the point that you're being given. And then it's using this calc function to actually move it slightly off a few pixels based on the size of this little rotated, triangular thing that I put on it. I'm also taking the frame hover circle that is by default created, and I'm going to turn it into a not filled circle because I find that more useful. Axis text and paths. I'm actually going to change the baseline to none because I don't like baselines very much. And let's see what that looks like. Looks a lot cleaner, right? And now when I hover over things, the number, whatever it is that I'm getting, is reported well. So what's that number? Well, that number is going to be the x-accessor comma y-accessor. That's just what you're given when you look at any of these things. But if you want to adjust that tooltip content, it is a tooltip content property. And your tooltip lives in HTML space. So make sure what you send back is HTML JSX. It's helpful to give it that same class name. It's not necessary. In fact, you might want to use different classes. But to begin with, that's a good place to start. And you're getting back D. D's that element that you're hovering over. So you could sit here and say, let's go look at our data structure. We would want name. I don't know, Japanese name seems cool. And then that height and weight, right? So d.name Japanese name, and then we can say height d.height m and weight d.weight kg, and we could say kilograms, and we could say meters, and take a look and see how that looks. There we go. So now we've got these little guys, and if we wanted to, we could, one thing I like to do is give sort of a reminder of what the color means. So on hover, I'm going to pull out the Japanese name. As much fun as it is to see Japanese characters, it's not going to help. So d.type1 is what we get that color from, right? And so we can just say color of d.type1. And where I'm going to put that, so I will say d.type1, so we'll tell you what type it is when you hover over it, right? Poison and dragon and so on. And then what we'll do is we'll give a little span style equals display inline block, border radius 100%, background, that color value, and probably want to give it a little bit of a margin on the right so that it doesn't run into the thing next to it. Margin right, 5px. And there we go. So hopefully nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. What is going on here? Border radius span. Oh, I've given it no height or width, haven't I? Let's do that then. Height 20px. I think by default all elements should have a 20 pixel height and width. What do you say? That's probably what's holding back HTML. So anyway, so that's nice, right? It's a nice little tooltip. Gives you the color, reminds you what the color means, and lets you sort of scroll over this now and you can look and see what things look like. I just noticed that my baseline isn't being honored. My baseline CSS isn't being honored. I wonder why that is. I get a little more space here. I know that if I want to, I can just turn off baselines. So I can say baseline false. And just get rid of them entirely so they're not even drawn, which is fine. And what else? I think I want to start my height and weight at 0. So x extent, you can send whatever extent you want, right? So if it's 0 to 8 meters, I could say 0, 4, which is nice. And then if I wanted to, I could set just one or the other. I could just set the top or the bottom extent by setting the other to undefined. This just ensures that I have a 0. And of course, just for convenience sake, I'm going to leave it like this so that people later on read it. But that means the same thing, just if you're following along at home. And if you ever see me, if you ever look in my code and you see that happening somewhere, that's because that's the same thing. I think I'll do 0 to 100 for weight. I wonder what's going on over here. I wonder if this is a bad data value. You have a bad data value because it's not hovering at all. Every time I go over there, it's not hovering on it. Everything else hovers fine. And also, it never moves. And so I have a feeling that something's wrong with that. What's brown? Ground thing over there. Anyway, I'll dig into that a little bit. Now, before I get into optimization, let's put another little chart on here. And to put another little chart on here, what we have to do is we have to turn this into a mini-map XY frame. Because remember, this is supposed to be brushable. So mini-map XY frame, which works very well, but it's not an API that I always remember off the top of my head. So let's go over and look at the API for that. Minimap basics. It's a minimap XY frame, and minimap takes all your regular settings, and then you get to pass it this nice little object that gives you settings for your minimap that it's going to put underneath it, or wherever it's going to put it. Now I think it's going to be hard to read if challenge with minimaps is that this is a square space. So if I put it down here and it's a little square, there's nothing else over here. So maybe I've dropped a legend over here or something like that. The other option is I could make it stretch all the way out, but that doesn't seem like it's very thoughtful for a mini map for a scatter plot. So let's make it. We'll make this a little bit smaller. We'll give it a mini map. And the mini map properties are going to have different properties where we want them to be different, right? We want the mini map probably to have a only slight margin. We might want it to have axes, but we probably don't want those axes to be labeled. Now you'll see this XY frame setting. And what's happening here is, in that example, I've created an object that has all the shared settings, so I can just spread them between the two. And it's a really useful technique that I was hoping to get into along with other optimization. What I can already see is, since it's already pretty late going, I'll do a second part 2 for this next week, and we'll really get into optimization and tuning and all of that stuff. Brush end, Y brushable, Y brush, X brush extent, and these kind of things. These are all stuff we're going to have to deal with. We want the size to be 200 by 200 because that's how many pixels I just ate out of my other one. Let's get rid of this and just go with, very quickly, we'll just copy paste. Of course, the joys of JSON versus JSX. So points, data, size, we're declaring size down there. X accessor is the same. Oh, that's what I forgot to do with my height and weight accessors. Maybe that's why I'm getting that weird value, right? The reason why I did not put these as strings was because we have to cast them, because they're strings and we want them to be numbers. Brush function is not defined, extent is not defined. So we do want it to be Y brushable. We will define a brush function in a second. I just want to make sure it renders correctly. There we go. We've got map and a mini map. You can see that it's got a little brush down here. Nothing's happening because I'm not telling it what to do. That didn't help my little problem data point. For one thing, we don't want these to be rendered in the same kind of way. Let's see what that looks like. One seems kind of small, but maybe it's not if we fill and stroke with the same colors. Let's go see. Still kind of small, but one nice thing that we can do is we can actually give this a more complicated margin. Left, we'll match the margin, at least for the top one, and then I think I'll just actually leave the rest of them without any margins at all. And then we'll increase the size to match that. The math's definitely easier to do. And, it's hard to even tell that this is a mini-map, right? Because we are giving no signals to the reader that this is anything but a bunch of dots in space. And so some nice signals to give them would be to turn on those same axes, right? So now we've got a little mini map. It's got some axes. The ticks themselves, I don't probably want tick format. I just want it to return nothing. I don't want ticks. Should do something about that, shouldn't I? There should be like a tick format false or something that just says don't even render ticks, much less So anyway, so now I've got this little mini map down here, and I could brush it, and that brush should do something, right? That's what this brush end function and all of this stuff is talking about. The brush extent, the X brush extent, the Y brush extent, things like that, that's the initial extent that you're going to assign to it. We're not going to deal with that right now because time. So we're going to send down a brush function, right? The brush function is what do I do after brushing? And this application, I didn't install Redux. We use Redux at work. You might use MobX or Flux or whatever it is that you're using for state management. For this very simple application, I literally am just going to use state in the app. I created a filters object. I'll play around with this, and whatever settings will be populated into this filters object. I'm going to need to send a brush function, so let's do this. Scatter brush. And that scatter brush is going to fire off some kind of event, right? And after that scatter brush fires off some kind of event, we're going to probably want to update these filters when we do that. But before we get there, let's take a look and see what that event is that it fires off. Send that down to the brushable. Scatter plot brush function equals scatter brush. Now I'm in brushable scatter plot. I get brush function out of here. And scatter brush is not defined because it's not scatter brush. It's this dot scatter brush. Right. So let's go see what that does. Weird. I don't know what those are for. Set attribute. A bunch of rectangles not getting the right attributes. I'll take a look at that later. So you can see that scatter brush is already firing off an initial function. It's giving us a bunch of nans. There's nothing going on when it first starts out. The second time when I do it though, and that's why you might want to set an initial function, you might want to handle that initial render. The second time, what do I get? I actually have this bounding box of the selection between x comma y and x comma y. So x1 is at 1.14, right? And that's height in meters. So I've brushed from 1.14 out to 7.21 and from 70 out to 0. Now remember, your brush, you could be brushing in different directions. You're going to have to handle that with whatever your function is. This is fundamentally this bounding box you're dealing with. So const bbox equals e, and then we get to do this kind of fun stuff. Const x1 comma y1 comma x2 comma y2 equals bbox. And now let's see what those all look like, right? x1, y1, x2, y2. I know it gave it away in the beginning, but there we go, right? Same numbers, but now with nice variable names. So what do we want to do here? What we want to do is we want to set some kind of filter in the state that says only show me the points that are valid within this range. So to do that, we'll say height range, and height range can be negative infinity to positive infinity, and weight range can be the same. And then when we come back, since we're going to be setting state within scatterbrush, then we need to make sure it gets access to this, so it can get access to this .set state. There are other ways to bind this and to do that. So let's make sure if x1, so they come back as nans that first time. We need to make sure it's not a nan. Then, and there's also cleaner ways to get to this, but I'm running short on time and I want to at least show a nice brushable thing that shows some other data visualization over there. Then what do we want to do? Well, we know that x1 and x2 could come back in any order, right? So we could either sort them, or we could simply say xmax equals math.max of x1, x2. I'm just going to do this quickly. You'd imagine I might even start like writing bars. That's how quickly I'm going to write all this stuff. You could use D3's extent, right? You could do all sorts of different ways to approach this. So that should do it. So this should tell us min and max values, right? And then we should be able to, with those, say this dot set state. Or actually not even this dot set state, because I don't have to, I could go right into set state, into filters. I tried to make this nice little function that does this, right? So this dot change filters, because that's the kind of function that you'd actually be passing down, that you'd actually be dealing with. And that's going to say height range equals, and then weight range equals. And the height range is the x values. So x min, comma x max, and then the weight range is the y values. And if we go into render, console log this dot state, hopefully, unless I made a typo somewhere, we'll see that change. So the initial state shows up, right? This dot state, filters, blah, blah, blah. I go and filter this, and what does that look like? This dot state now has filters, and it says, sure enough, the height range 4.2 and the weight range 6.1. You'll notice that what we've also got in this dot state is some filtered data. So I could be, part of your reducer, but in this case, since we already know, I've got these filters because maybe I'll use them somewhere else. These filter values somewhere else, but let's put filtered data instead of at the top level of this dots. Oh no, I shouldn't do that. That's messy. We'll just do a straight this dot set state. It should queue them up. Filtered data. Equals what? Poke data, right? Dot filter. And what are we looking for? We're looking for return p dot height m. I had so many grand plans. It's funny how long these things take. P dot height m is greater than or equal to x min, and p dot height m is less than or equal to x max, and the same thing for the weights. Except in the case of the weights, it's the y values, right? Let's see if that works. Constant x dy dmin. What on earth? All right. What does that look like? Filtered data. Look at that. We have filtered data. And if we want to, we could take that filtered data and we could also pass that to scatter brush. We could say filtered data dot length greater than 0 and send the filtered data. Otherwise, send the full data. Filtered data equals this dot state. And let's see if that works. And it does. The problem is, right, is that as I filter this, it's like this terrible game. I run out of items as I slowly filter them all away, right? Because what's going on here? I'm sending the filtered data and the full data to both the scatter plot and its mini-map. So really what I want to do is I want full data to be pulled out of here. And I want to make sure that the full data is always going to the mini-map, right? It shouldn't update its display of data as you brush it. Now I can go to certain parts of the map and see. And you'll see also that now that I'm not using a dynamic extent, it's doing this. There's another thing that you're seeing that I'm not talking about, which is that they're transitioning in a crazy zany way. So let's handle two of these things. Let's handle each of them. We'll get rid of the extents entirely, because I think that'll be a better user experience. And now it's zooming to whatever region I'm in, which is great. But you might ask yourself, why are those crazy circles transitioning in such a crazy way? Well, what happens under the hood is the semiotic tries to understand how you want to transition things. It tries to guess, and it guesses based on array position. And so once you start filtering data and moving it around, then it doesn't know that this data point corresponds to that data point unless you tell it to. So you have to send it a render key function. That render key function should point to a unique identifier that becomes your render key. In this case, the name of our Pokemon. You shouldn't have more than one Pokemon with the same name, right? And that's how it works. And you can turn off if you don't like the animations. You can tell it not to animate, but animations, are helpful. Anyway, so now you can zoom into some particular region, right? We've got this weird, I don't know who the outlier is over here. Whoever it is. 8.8 meters tall, 210 kilograms. 210 kilograms? Oh, I don't understand this at all. I feel like somehow I'm filtering out in my extents, my initial extents. Oh, okay. Maybe all this time I thought that these values only went up to 100. I don't know what made me think that. But there's a Snorlax up here it's a 260 kilogram thing. Interesting. Right. So what happened here was that I clicked and cleared the brush, and you do have to handle that. You click and clear the brush, it'll send a null event. So you have to have some kind of case for that. If e equals null, then what do we want to do? Probably set the state so that we have filtered data. We'd want to reset everything, right? We want to say, go back to the beginning, filter data. It's empty, and these things are all infinities of one form or another. So I go here and do that, then I click and it gives me invalid attempt to destruction non-iterable instance. Well, now hold on a second. I don't know what's going on here. There's a duck quacking in the background, so I'm going to skip this one and I'll come back to it. I'll take a look deeper into it. I'm sure that I'm just not thinking about something. Oh, right. I'm doing set state, and then I'm letting the rest of the function run, right? That's probably it. Like, even though I did all that set statey stuff. Yeah, okay, good. I feel better. It's always nice when you aren't completely crazy with the things that you've built over and over again. That's a lot. Very quickly, what I want to do is I want to throw in one more data visualization, and then I'm going to call it a day. Because my goal here was to have some kind of like interactive dashboard, and really all I've got is one thing. So let's go and make a new file, save it as type bars. We're going to make this out of an ordinal frame. Export default props. Think a bar chart, right? Ordinal frame is just a fancy name for a bar chart sometimes. And I have to import that. Import type bars. And I'll go drop the type bars below my legend, wherever the heck that is. There we go. Type bars. I'm going to send it that filtered data, right? Get into type bars. Let's make sure. Yep. This one's going to have an ordinal frame. The O accessor is going to be type 1. The R accessor will be nothing, because all I really want. Let's see, what do I want for the R accessor? I'm making a bar chart out of it. I just want to see a piece for each individual. I don't need to see their total hit points, total height. Actually, I could see their total height. Why not? I mean, if they all stood on top of each other, right? Did you ever wonder what they'd look like? How tall would each? There we go. I finally answered some kind of question. Type equals bar. Data equals props.data. Let's see if that works. Yeah, sure enough, bar chart. Let's add some stuff to it. First I have to send some color down, right? I have to send those colors. Give a little space between the columns. Can't read property grass if undefined. Probably should save things when I'm gonna use them. Need an R-accessor. Sorry, not an R-accessor. I need an axis. This is important. Orient left. Label total height. And this is starting to get silly. So see what happens when we label it. And total height. Need some margins. I need to turn these labels into dynamic labels. Need my margin to be a bit better. Left 70, bottom 70, top right. See what that looks like. Total height in meters of all of the Pokemon. Now, did anyone know that? Did anyone know that water Pokemon have the tallest, if they were all to stand on each other's heads, that they would have the tallest Poke Tower? Black. And so it's nice, but really what we want is we want this sorted, right? Of course we do. So we need the data dot sort sorted by height. That didn't work. Why doesn't that work? A.heightm, B.heightm. I thought it was simple enough to sort like that. Do I have to actually write a whole full sorting function? No, everything's fine. And there you have it. And what's cool about this, right, or at least what should be cool about this, is that once we zoom in, sure enough, we can look at the total height of whatever area we wanted to look at. And again, render key, right? Render key is your friend. D.name. And there they are. So you can see that when we get into, let's say, the very, I don't know, very light Pokemon, amongst light Pokemon versus heavier Pokemon, we can compare the total heights. And it's obvious somehow that water Pokemon are the tallest. But you can see individually that we've got an individual tall Pokemon here. I'm going to stop there. I had a lot more in mind than just this, but it's a good start. Next week, I'll show you how to optimize a bit of this. We'll also add a few more charts. I expected to add a few more charts than this. And I hope you'll join me. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope this was useful. Like I like to say, if you want to... oh wait, I've got people in my chat room saying things. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I was hoping that you would find out whether or not your bug Pokemon were in the top 10 of Pokemon towers if they were all to stand on each other's heads. This is exactly the kind of thing that I do at Netflix for money, except I answer much more pedantic questions than how tall Pokemons are. Yeah, so tune in next week. I will make this, I'll recreate some of the charts that I created early on in some of my earlier live streams, like the radial chart that shows you which groups which types these Pokemon fall into, and also how to optimize this stuff, and maybe make it, who knows, do some sketchy rendering or something, right? Thanks, everybody.